They told me my 10-year-old son slipped. They said gravity took him off that bridge. But gravity does not leave fingerprints shaped like a grown man's hand on a child's throat. I stood in the ICU, listening to the machine breathe for my boy, while outside the door, the men who put him there were laughing. They did not know I was listening. And they definitely did not know that the quiet soldier they mocked was about to become their worst nightmare. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. The sound of a ventilator is the loudest noise in the world when it is keeping your only child alive. I stood there, gripping the cold metal rail of the hospital bed, staring at Felix. His face was a map of purple bruises and swollen skin. Tubes ran down his throat. The doctor said he fell 60 feet into the river water. He said it was a miracle Felix was not dead on impact. But looking at my boy, broken and silent, it did not feel like a miracle. It felt like the opening shot of a war I did not know I was fighting. I had not slept in 30 hours. I drove straight from the base in Georgia the second I got the call. I was still wearing my boots, still smelling like stale coffee and diesel fuel. I was supposed to be on leave. I was supposed to be taking Felix fishing next week. Instead, I was watching a plastic tube pump air into his lungs. Mason. The voice came from the doorway. It was sharp, cold, and familiar. I did not turn around immediately. I took a breath, letting the Ranger training take over. Assess. Calm. Execute. I turned slowly. Morgan stood there. My ex-wife. She looked perfectly put together, as always. Designer coat. Hair done, makeup flawless despite the fact that our son was in a coma 3 feet away. But she was not alone. She never was. Behind her, crowding the hallway like a pack of wolves, were her brothers. 6 of them. Julian, Grant, Dominic, Kyle, Ryder, Blake, the O'Connell boys. In this town, that name meant money. It meant influence. It meant they could park their oversized trucks wherever they wanted, and the local cops would look the other way. They stood shoulder to shoulder, arms crossed, staring me down. They did not look sad. They looked annoyed, like this was an inconvenience to their schedule. The doctor said he is stable, Morgan said, her voice completely empty of tears. You did not need to come. Did not need to come? I repeated, my voice raspy. I stepped away from the bed, moving into the center of the room. My son fell off the West Creek Bridge, Morgan. That has a 4-foot safety railing. Felix is 4'8". He did not just fall. Julian, the oldest, stepped forward. He was a big guy, used to intimidating contractors and city council members. He chewed on a toothpick, smirking. Kids climb, Mason. Kids play. It was an accident. The police already wrote it up. Don't come in here with your military paranoia, trying to make it something else. The railing, I said, locking eyes with him, is rusted shut on the maintenance hatch. I checked it on the way here. He could not climb it. Someone lifted him. The room went deadly silent. I saw it then. A flicker of a glance between Ryder and Blake, the 2 youngest brothers. A micro-expression of guilt. Or maybe fear. Watch your mouth, Grant snapped, stepping up beside Julian. You have been gone for 6 months playing soldier. You do not know what happened. You were not here. I am here now, I said softly. Morgan sighed, checking her diamond watch. Look, Mason, we have things to handle. Lawyers, insurance. The boys are handling the medical bills. You do not have the money for this kind of care anyway. Just go back to the motel. We will call you if anything changes. She was dismissing me, like I was an employee, like I was not the father of the boy in the bed. I am staying, I said. Suit yourself. Julian laughed, a dry, ugly sound. But do not get in the way. This is family business. And you are not family anymore. They turned to leave, a wall of expensive leather jackets and cologne. As they walked out, Kyle bumped my shoulder hard. It was deliberate. A check. A warning. I let them go. I did not react. In the Rangers, you learn that you do not engage until you have the advantage. And right now, I was outnumbered, outgunned, and on their turf. I turned back to Felix. I reached out and gently lifted his limp hand. That is when I saw it. The doctors had cleaned him up, but on the inside of his upper arm, right where a thumb would press if you were grabbing someone to drag them, was a faint bruise. It was not a bruise from hitting the water. It was a bruise in the shape of a fingertip. A large, thick fingertip. I traced the mark with my eyes. I closed them, visualizing the bridge, the height, the water, the terror my son must have felt. "Daddy is here," I whispered to the empty air. "And I promise you, I am going to burn it all down." I walked out of the room 10 minutes later to get coffee. I passed the waiting room down the hall. They were still there, the brothers. They were laughing. I stopped around the corner, out of sight. "Did you see his face?" That was Blake's voice. He looked like he was going to cry. "Let him cry." Julian's deep voice rumbled. "He cannot do anything. Chief Miller already signed off on the report. Accidental fall due to negligence of the minor. It is done. You sure the kid won't wake up and talk?" Ryder asked. He sounded nervous. "If he wakes up," Julian said, his voice dropping lower, but still audible to my trained ears, "he knows better than to say a word. He knows what happens if he talks. He knows we can reach him anywhere. Besides, who is going to believe a brain-damaged kid over us?" Then, Grant spoke up, his voice full of amusement. "Hey, at least the funeral costs will be cheap if he doesn't make it. Small casket." And then, they laughed. It was not a nervous laugh. It was a belly laugh. My blood ran cold. Then it turned to fire. This was not an accident. They threw him. Maybe they did not mean to kill him. Maybe they just meant to scare him. But they threw my son off a bridge like a bag of trash. And now they were laughing about covering it up. I looked down at my hands. They were not shaking. They were perfectly steady. I had spent 15 years learning how to dismantle enemies. I knew how to sabotage supply lines, how to break morale, how to hunt men who thought they were safe in their fortresses. The O'Connell brothers thought they were untouchable because they owned the town, the police, and the bank. They thought I was just some broke ex-husband with a heavy rucksack and a sad story. They had no idea what a nightmare looked like. But they were about to find out. I turned around and walked back toward my son's room. I pulled out my phone. I did not call the police. The police were compromised. I did not call a lawyer. A lawyer could not fix this. I opened my notes app and started a list. Target 1, Julian. Target 2, Grant. Target 3, Dominic. Target 4, Kyle. Target 5, Ryder. Target 6, Blake. I looked at the reflection of my face in the darkened hospital window. The tired father was gone. The ranger was back. I was not going to yell. I was not going to fight them in the hospital lobby. I was going to wait. I was going to watch. And one by one, I was going to take everything they loved away from them. I put the phone away and touched the cool glass of the window. Outside, the city lights were blinking. Somewhere out there was evidence. Somewhere out there, the truth was waiting for me to find it. Next, I whispered to myself. I left the hospital 20 minutes later. I did not go to my motel, and I did not go to the police station. The police had already made their choice. They had chosen the O'Connell money over the truth. I walked out into the cold night air, the automatic doors sliding shut behind me with a hiss that sounded like a final breath. My truck was parked in the far corner of the lot, an old Ford that had seen more deployments than most soldiers. It was invisible in a town full of shiny, leased luxury SUVs. I drove to the West Creek Bridge. It was midnight now. The town was asleep, but the bridge stood awake, a gray concrete skeleton stretching over the black water below. I parked a mile away and walked the rest of the distance through the woods, moving silently. I did not want headlights announcing my arrival. I needed to see what the police had missed. When I reached the bridge, my stomach turned. There was no yellow tape, no police cruiser guarding the scene. It was just open road, as if nothing had happened there. As if a boy hadn't been thrown off the edge just hours ago. I pulled a tactical flashlight from my jacket pocket, keeping the beam low and red-filtered so it wouldn't attract attention from passing cars. I walked to the spot where the railing was highest, the spot directly above the deep channel where they found Felix. I ran my hand along the metal. It was cold and rusted. I saw scuff marks on the concrete barrier. Fresh ones, the kind made by expensive leather shoes scrambling for leverage. I crouched down, shutting off the emotional part of my brain. I was not a father right now. I was a tracker. I looked at the dirt on the shoulder of the road. It had rained 2 days ago, so the ground was soft. There were tire tracks, wide, aggressive treads. Truck tires. I took a picture with my phone. Then I saw it. It was caught in a patch of weeds near the drainage grate, about 5 feet from the edge. It was small, metallic, and glinting faintly in the moonlight. I reached out with a gloved hand and picked it up. It was a cufflink. Heavy gold, custom-made. Engraved on the face were 2 letters, J.O. Julian O'Connell. He had been here. He had been right here, struggling, maybe grabbing at Felix as my son tried to get away. The cufflink must have popped off when Felix fought back. My boy had fought. The thought made my chest ache with a pain so sharp I almost dropped the light. I put the cufflink in a plastic evidence bag I kept in my kit and zipped it into my pocket. This was enough for an arrest in a normal town. But here, if I took this to Chief Miller, it would disappear from the evidence locker by morning. Or worse, they would say I planted it. No, I wasn't going to give them the chance to bury this. I was going to bury them. I left the bridge and drove to the north side of town, to the O'Connell compound. It was a sprawling estate with 3 large houses behind a wrought iron gate. This was where the clan lived. Julian in the main house, the brothers in the guest wings. It was a fortress of arrogance. I parked the truck deep in the treeline on the ridge overlooking the estate. I pulled out my spotting scope and settled into the dirt. I had laid in mud for 3 days in Afghanistan waiting for a target. Waiting in the bushes of a rich suburb was a vacation. The lights were on in the main house. Through the large bay windows, I could see them. They were celebrating. Julian was pouring whiskey from a crystal decanter. Grant was smoking a cigar, his feet up on a coffee table. Dominic and Kyle were laughing at something on the TV. They looked relaxed. They looked like men who had just taken out the trash, not men who had tried to murder a child. But then I shifted the scope to the patio. Ryder was there, the youngest brother. He wasn't drinking. He was pacing. He kept running his hands through his hair. He looked pale, even from this distance. He checked his phone, put it away, then checked it again. He was the weak link. In every unit, in every group of bad men, there is always one who breaks first. Julian was the muscle. Grant was the money. But Ryder? Ryder was the coward. He was the one who probably stood by and watched, too scared to stop it, but too weak to live with it. I watched him for an hour. I learned his rhythm. I saw how the other brothers ignored him when he walked back inside. I saw Julian slap him on the back of the head, hard, a bullying gesture disguised as brotherhood. Ryder flinched. That flinch told me everything I needed to know. I lowered the scope. The rage was still there, burning hot in my gut, but now it had a direction, a focus. You don't take down a fortress by attacking the thickest wall. You find the crack in the foundation and you hammer a wedge into it until the whole thing crumbles. Ryder O'Connell was my wedge. I didn't need a gun. I didn't need to break down their door tonight. I just needed to let them know that the darkness was staring back. I pulled out a burner phone I had picked up at a gas station on the way into town. I typed a single message. I didn't send it to Julian. I sent it to Ryder. His number was listed on the company website for sales, a job he probably wasn't qualified for. The text read, "You dropped something at the bridge. J.O." I watched through the scope. 3 seconds later, Ryder pulled his phone out of his pocket. I saw him freeze. He stared at the screen. He looked up, scanning the dark windows, then out toward the treeline where I was hidden. He looked terrified. He rushed over to Julian and tried to show him the phone. Julian pushed him away, laughing, spilling his drink. He didn't even look at the screen. He thought Ryder was being dramatic. He thought his little brother was just being a buzzkill. Ryder retreated to the corner of the room, alone. He was shaking. Perfect. I packed up my gear. The seed was planted. Tonight, Ryder wouldn't sleep. Tomorrow, the paranoia would start to rot him from the inside out. And when he broke, he was going to take the rest of them down with him. I walked back to my truck, the gravel crunching softly under my boots. The war had officially begun. They thought they were the predators because they had numbers and money. They didn't realize that in the wild, the most dangerous thing isn't the pack of wolves making noise. It's the hunter you never see coming. I started the engine. I had work to do. The next morning, the sun rose over the town of Oakwood like a spotlight exposing a crime scene. I was already awake. I had spent the night in a cheap motel room on the edge of town, walls thin enough to hear the highway traffic. I had turned one wall into a war room. Photos printed from the internet were taped up, the brothers, their business locations, their known associates. Red string connected them all to the center. Felix. I wasn't just angry. I was methodical. My first move wasn't physical. It was psychological. I needed to isolate Ryder, to make him feel like he was drowning while his brothers were on a yacht. At 8 a.m., I watched Ryder's car pull out of the compound gates. He drove a flashy red sports car, the kind that screamed, "I have money but no taste." He was heading to the O'Connell construction office downtown. I followed him, keeping 3 cars back. He was driving erratically, swerving slightly, braking too hard at lights. He was rattled. The text message from last night was still eating at him. He parked in his reserved spot and hurried into the building. I waited. I knew from my research that Ryder had a gambling problem. Underground poker games in the city, sports betting apps. The kid was a degenerate gambler living on his brother Julian's allowance. That was leverage. I drove to a public library 2 towns over to use a secure computer. I didn't want any digital footprints leading back to me. I logged into a secure forum I used to use for intel gathering. It didn't take long to find the local bookie's digital ledger. These guys never secure their data properly. Ryder was in deep. He owed $50,000 to a syndicate in the city. I smiled. This was too easy. I printed out a copy of his debt sheet. Then, I drove back to Oakwood. I didn't go to Ryder. I went to the job site where his car was parked. I slipped into the parking garage, moving between the concrete pillars like a shadow. I reached his red car. The window was cracked open an inch, careless. I slid the folded paper through the crack. On it, I had written in red marker, "Does Julian know?" I disappeared before he came back out for lunch. I stationed myself across the street in a cafe, watching. At 12:30 p.m., Ryder came out. He unlocked his car, got in, and I saw the moment he found the paper. He froze. He looked around wildly, his head whipping back and forth, scanning the other cars, the pedestrians, the windows of the buildings. He looked right at me through the cafe window, but he didn't see me. He just saw a guy in a baseball cap drinking coffee. He didn't see the executioner. He crumpled the paper and threw it on the floorboard, then pulled out his phone and made a frantic call. He wasn't calling the police. You don't call the cops about illegal gambling debts. He was calling the only person who could save him, Julian. I could see him shouting into the phone, slamming his hand on the steering wheel. Then he stopped. He listened, and then he slumped back in his seat. Julian had hung up on him. I knew exactly what Julian had said. "Stop whining. Handle your own mess." Ryder was alone. I decided to turn the heat up. I waited until evening. The brothers were gathering at a high-end steakhouse for their weekly business dinner. It was a power move. They took the biggest table in the center of the room, loudly ordering expensive wine, making sure everyone saw them. They were celebrating their immunity. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I didn't need to be inside to ruin their appetite. I walked around to the back of the restaurant, near the valet stand. The valet was a young kid, maybe 18, looking bored. I walked up to him, holding a $20 bill and a sealed envelope. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice casual. "You know the O'Connell table inside?" "Yeah, the kids' side. Loudest table in the place." "One of them dropped this." I lied. "The youngest one, Ryder. Can you just walk by and drop it on the table? Don't say who gave it to you. Just say a guy found it outside." "Sure." The kid shrugged, taking the money and the envelope. I retreated to the shadows of the alleyway and watched through the window. The kid walked up to the table. The brothers were laughing, clinking glasses. The kid dropped the envelope in front of Ryder and walked away. Ryder stared at it. It was a plain white envelope. He hesitated. Julian, sitting at the head of the table, noticed the hesitation. He grabbed the envelope from Ryder's plate and ripped it open. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture I had taken at the bridge the night before. But it wasn't of the bridge itself. It was a zoomed-in shot of the tire tracks in the mud. And next to the tracks, I had photoshopped a picture of Ryder's specific custom rims. It was a bluff. The tracks were generic truck tires, but Ryder didn't know that. And Julian didn't know that. I saw Julian's face turn purple. He slammed the photo down on the table. The laughter died instantly. He leaned in close to Ryder, whispering something venomous. Ryder was shaking his head, pleading, looking like he was about to vomit. The other brothers, Grant, Dominic, Kyle, all leaned in, their faces tight with suspicion. Suddenly, Ryder stood up. He knocked his chair over. He was shouting something now. I couldn't hear the words through the glass, but I could read the body language. I didn't tell anyone. I swear. He looked around the restaurant, his eyes wide and manic. He pointed at the window, right at where I had been standing earlier. He was cracking. "Someone is watching us," he screamed, his voice muffled by the glass, but clear enough to turn heads inside. "He knows." Julian stood up and grabbed Ryder by the collar of his jacket, dragging him out of the restaurant. The other brothers followed, looking embarrassed and furious. They threw Ryder into the back of an SUV and peeled out of the parking lot. I watched them go, a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. They were turning on each other. Julian thought Ryder was being reckless. Ryder thought Julian wasn't protecting him. The trust was fracturing. I pulled out my phone and sent one more text to Ryder. "Tick-tock, Ryder. The bridge is calling." I turned and walked away into the night. I had not thrown a single punch. I had not fired a single shot. And yet, I had just destroyed their peace of mind forever. The monster under the bed was real, and he was coming for them all. The next 48 hours were silent. That was the thing about fear. It made people quiet before it made them scream. I knew the O'Connell brothers were hunkered down in their compound, trying to figure out who was leaking information. They were looking for a rat inside their own house. They weren't looking at the city records office, which is exactly where I was. I spent 2 days digging, not into their personal lives, but into the foundation of their power, O'Connell Construction. In a town like this, you don't get rich by following the rules. You get rich by cutting corners. I pulled building permits, inspection reports, and public safety records. It was a maze of paperwork, but I knew what I was looking for. I had done construction for a year after my second tour. I knew where the bodies were buried, sometimes literally. I found it in the Riverview Estates project. It was their crown jewel, a massive luxury apartment complex set to open next month. Millions of dollars were tied up in it. If that project failed, the family would bleed cash. I cross-referenced the concrete supply orders with the architectural requirements. The specs called for high-grade, reinforced concrete for the foundation pillars. But the invoices from their supplier showed they had purchased a cheaper, lower-grade mix, something that would crack under stress in 5 years. It was fraud. Massive, dangerous fraud. And they had bribed the city inspector to sign off on it. The inspector's signature was on every page. P. Miller, the police chief's brother. It all connected. I didn't take this to the police. I didn't take it to the mayor. I took it to the one place that loved a scandal more than justice, the press. But I had to be smart. If I walked into the local newspaper office, they would call Julian before I even left the building. Julian owned the ad space that kept that paper alive. So, I went regional. I drove 2 hours to the city. I sat in a Starbucks with a laptop and created a secure, anonymous email account. I scanned the documents, the invoices, the fake inspection reports, the safety violations. I wrote a simple subject line, O'Connell Construction, the collapse is coming. I sent it to the state's biggest investigative journalist, a woman named Sarah. No, not Sarah. I mean, a reporter named Elena. She had a reputation for eating corrupt businessmen for breakfast. I hit send. Then, I drove back to Oakwood to watch the fireworks. It happened at 10 a.m. the next morning. I was parked down the street from the O'Connell Construction headquarters. It was a glass-fronted building that looked arrogant and expensive. Ryder's car wasn't there today. He was probably still locked in his room, terrified. But Julian's truck was there. So was Grant's. Suddenly, 3 news vans pulled up. Not local vans. State news vans. They blocked the driveway. Reporters jumped out with cameras and microphones. Then came the state inspectors. Elena had done her work fast. She must have called the governor's office. I watched through my binoculars as men in hard hats and reflective vests, state safety board officials, marched into the lobby. They weren't smiling. They were carrying clipboards and stop work orders. 5 minutes later, the chaos started. Employees were running around inside the glass lobby. Phones were ringing off the hook. I could see the receptionists looking panicked. Then, Julian and Grant stormed out the front door. Julian looked like he was ready to kill someone. He shoved a microphone away from his face. "This is harassment," he shouted, his face turning a deep, dangerous red. "We have permits. Get these cameras out of here." "Mr. O'Connell," a reporter shouted back, "is it true you used substandard concrete on the Riverview project? Are you endangering future tenants to save money?" Julian froze. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of losing the one thing that mattered more to him than family, his empire. Grant tried to pull Julian back inside, but the damage was done. The stop work order was slapped on the glass doors. The bank accounts would be frozen by noon pending investigation. The investors would pull out by dinner. I sat in my truck, sipping lukewarm coffee, feeling a cold satisfaction. They had thrown my son off a bridge because he was an inconvenience. Now, I had made them the inconvenience. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the local police scanner app one had installed. All units, disturbance at the O'Connell residence. Report of a domestic dispute. Shots fired? Negative, just shouting. Neighbors reporting aggressive behavior. They were cracking. The pressure was boiling over. I started the truck. It was time to return to the hospital. I needed to see Felix. I needed to remind myself why I was doing this. When I got to the ICU, the hallway was empty. The brothers weren't there. Morgan wasn't there. They were all too busy trying to save their money to care about the boy they had broken. I walked into the room. Felix looked the same. Still silent. But the bruise on his arm was fading, turning a sickly yellow. I sat down in the chair next to his bed. "I got them, buddy," I whispered. "I hit them where it hurts. They're losing their money. And when bad men lose their money, they lose their loyalty." I knew what would happen next. When the ship starts sinking, the rats start eating each other. That evening, I returned to my motel room. I found something slid under my door. It was a plain white envelope. My heart rate spiked. Had they found me? I drew my sidearm from my waistband and cleared the room. Bathroom clear. Closet clear. Under the bed clear. I holstered the weapon and picked up the envelope. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of hotel stationery. On it was a handwritten note, scribbled in shaky, terrified handwriting. I didn't touch him. I swear. It was Julian and Blake. I just drove the car. Please stop. I'll tell you everything. It wasn't signed. But I knew who it was. Ryder. He had broken. The financial hit had scared him. He knew Julian would sacrifice him to save the company. So Ryder was looking for a lifeboat. I smiled. The first domino had fallen. I took out my burner phone and typed a number I had found in the public records, Ryder's personal cell. I sent one message. "Meet me. Midnight. The old lumber yard. Come alone, or the next leak goes to the FBI." I packed my gear. Tonight, I wasn't just a ghost. Tonight, I was going to get a confession. The old lumber yard was a graveyard of rotting wood and rusted machinery on the edge of town. It was the perfect place for a meeting that never happened. The wind howled through the skeletal remains of the warehouses, kicking up dust and dead leaves. I arrived an hour early. I always arrived early. I didn't wait in the open. I climbed up into the rafters of the main shed, settling into the darkness 20 feet above the ground. From here, I could see everything. I checked my sight lines. I checked my exits. I checked my recording device. At 11:58 p.m., headlights cut through the darkness. It was Ryder's red sports car. He parked erratically, the tires crunching loudly on the gravel. He killed the engine, but he didn't get out immediately. I could see him in the driver's seat, head in his hands. He was hyperventilating. Finally, he opened the door and stepped out. He looked like a wreck. His expensive clothes were rumpled, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He was holding a flashlight that shook in his hand. "Hello," he called out, his voice cracking. "I'm here. You said to come alone." I didn't answer. I let him stew in the silence for a full minute. Let the fear settle in. Let him feel the weight of the dark. "Please," he shouted, spinning around, trying to see into the shadows. "Julian is going to kill me if he finds out I'm here. Just tell me what you want." I spoke from the darkness above him. My voice echoed off the metal roof, making it impossible to pinpoint my location. "I want the truth, Ryder." He jumped, nearly dropping the light. He shined it up into the rafters, but I was well hidden behind a steel beam. "Who are you?" he screamed. "Are you a Fed? Are you working for Mason?" "It doesn't matter who I am," I said, my voice calm, flat, terrifying. "What matters is what you did. Tell me about the bridge." Ryder collapsed to his knees in the dirt. He was sobbing now. I didn't want to. "Julian made us go. He said the kid needed a lesson. He said Felix was becoming a problem." "A problem?" I asked. "A 10-year-old boy was a problem?" "Morgan," Ryder blurted out. It was Morgan. She was complaining that Felix wouldn't listen to her, that he wanted to live with his dad. She told Julian. She told him to scare the kid. Just scare him. Make him afraid of the outside so he'd stay home. My blood froze. Morgan. I had suspected she was negligent. I had suspected she was cold. But this? She had ordered a hit on her own son's spirit? She had unleashed these monsters on our boy just to keep him under her control? "Keep talking," I commanded. "We took him for a ride," Ryder stammered, tears streaming down his face. "Just to scare him. But he fought. He bit Julian. Julian got mad. He dragged him to the edge. He held him over the water. He just meant to dangle him. But Felix kicked, and Julian, his hand slipped. I swear to God, his hand slipped." "Liar," I hissed. "I saw the bruise. Julian didn't slip. He threw him." Ryder was weeping openly now, rocking back and forth. Maybe he did. Julian was so mad. He said, "This ends now." And then he let go. I had it. I had the confession. It was recording on the device in my pocket. But I wasn't done with Ryder. Not yet. "You're a coward, Ryder," I said. "And cowards don't survive in a pack of wolves. Julian knows you're weak. Why do you think he sent you here?" Ryder froze. "What? No. Julian doesn't know I'm here." I snuck out. "Did you?" I asked. "Or did he let you leave? Did he put a tracker on your car? Is he on his way right now to clean up his mess?" It was a lie. Julian didn't know. But Ryder didn't know that. Ryder scrambled up, looking at his car in horror. He started patting the wheel wells, looking for a bug. The paranoia I had planted in Part 3 was blooming into full-blown psychosis. "He's coming," I whispered. "Run, Ryder. Run before he gets here." Ryder didn't hesitate. He scrambled back into his car, tires spinning in the dirt as he peeled out of the lumber yard. He drove like the devil himself was chasing him. I waited 10 minutes to make sure he was gone. Then I climbed down. I had the recording. I had the truth. But I also had something better: chaos. Ryder was going to go back to that house convinced that Julian was trying to kill him. He was going to act erratic, dangerous. He was going to attack first. I drove back toward the town, the recording burning a hole in my pocket. I needed to verify the Morgan connection. I needed to hear it from her. I drove past the O'Connell compound. The lights were blazing. I could see shadows moving frantically in the windows. They were fighting. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered. "Yeah. Mason." The voice was whisper quiet. Terrified. It was Dominic, the third brother. The one who had always been the quietest. The one who had actually bought Felix a birthday present last year. "Dominic," I said. "Listen to me," Dominic whispered. "You need to get out of town. Julian found your motel. He knows you're not just a grieving father. He found your kid. I slammed on the brakes. My kit. I had left a backup bag at the motel, maps, photos, a spare sidearm. If Julian had found that, he knew I was hunting them. He knew this wasn't just grief. He knew it was war. Where are they? I asked. They're coming to the motel, Dominic said. Right now? With guns. Julian is. He's lost it, Mason. He says he's going to put you in the river with your son. Why are you telling me this? Because, Dominic's voice broke. Because I saw the bruise too. And I can't sleep. He hung up. I looked at the road ahead. I could turn left and leave town. I could go to the state police. Or I could turn right, back toward the motel. I turned right. I wasn't going to run. If they wanted a fight, I would give them one. But I wasn't going to be in the room when they kicked the door down. I was going to be watching. I parked the truck 2 blocks away and ran through the alleyways. I reached the motel just as 3 black SUVs screeched into the parking lot. I dove behind a dumpster as 6 men jumped out. They weren't just the brothers. They had hired muscle. They were carrying baseball bats and handguns. Julian was leading them. He kicked open the door to room 104. They stormed in, shouting, smashing furniture. I watched from the shadows, my hand on my own weapon. They were tearing the room apart looking for me. But I was gone. And now, I knew exactly how far they were willing to go. They had escalated from intimidation to attempted murder. I pulled out the recording of Ryder. It was time to light the match. I didn't sleep that night. I spent it in the cab of my truck, parked deep in the woods on federal land where the O'Connell influence couldn't reach. The recording of Ryder's confession was playing on a loop in my head. Morgan told him to scare the kid. It was worse than any physical blow I had ever taken. The woman I had once loved, the mother of my child, had orchestrated his destruction. But I needed proof. Ryder's word wasn't enough. A junkie gambler's confession would be torn apart by expensive lawyers in court. I needed the smoking gun. I remembered something. Felix had a habit. He was a tech-savvy kid, always playing with his phone, recording videos of his Lego builds, his fishing trips, and his arguments. He had started doing it a year ago when the divorce got ugly. He said he wanted to remember who said what. I had access to his cloud account. I paid for the family plan. I opened my laptop, tethering it to my phone. I logged into the cloud. Folder, videos. Date, the day of the accident. There was one file. Uploaded at 4:32 p.m., 30 minutes before the 911 call. My hand shook as I clicked play. The video was shaky. It was audio only mostly, the camera lens covered, probably inside Felix's pocket. Mom, please, Felix's small voice said. I don't want to go with Uncle Julian. He looks mad. Then Morgan's voice. Crystal clear. Cold. You're going, Felix. You need to learn respect. You think your father is some big hero? He's a loser. And you're acting just like him. I just want to call Dad, Felix cried. Give me the phone. Morgan snapped. There was a scuffle. Then silence. But the recording didn't stop. Felix must have had a second app running, or maybe he hid the phone before she could grab it. The audio continued. It was muffled now. He's in the car, Morgan's voice said, sounding like she was talking to someone else nearby. Take him to the bridge. Scare him. Dangle him if you have to. Just make sure when he comes back, he's too terrified to ever ask for Mason again. I want him broken, Julian. Break him. Then, Julian's deep rumble. Consider it done. We'll make him fly. The recording ended. I sat there in the silence of the woods, staring at the screen. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It wasn't sadness. It was molten rage. She hadn't just been negligent. She hadn't just been compliant. She was the architect. She had ordered the torture of our son to win a custody battle. I closed the laptop. The game had changed. This wasn't just about the brothers anymore. This was about cutting the head off the snake. I needed to fracture them completely. Ryder was already broken. Dominic was wavering. But Morgan? She was the glue holding them together. If the brothers knew she had been recorded giving the order, they would turn on her to save themselves. But I had a better idea. I opened my audio editing software. I took the recording. I spliced it. I cut out Julian's voice. I cut out the part where Morgan told them to scare him. I left only the parts that sounded like she was setting them up. Edited version, you're going. Uncle Julian looks mad. Take him to the bridge. I want him broken. We'll make him fly. It sounded like Morgan was describing what Julian did, not what she ordered. It sounded like she was a witness blaming them. I saved the file. Then, I drove back into town. I went to Dominic's house. He lived slightly apart from the main compound, a smaller house with a well-tended garden. He was the only one with a conscience. I walked up to his front door at 6 a.m. I didn't knock. I slid a flash drive under the door. Attached to it was a note. Julian is going down. Morgan is already making a deal. Listen to this. She's selling you all out. I went back to my truck and watched. 10 minutes later, the lights in Dominic's house came on. 5 minutes after that, Dominic ran out of the house. He didn't look scared like Ryder. He looked furious. He jumped into his truck and sped toward the main compound. I followed. When Dominic arrived at the main house, he didn't ring the bell. He kicked the door. I watched from the perimeter fence. Julian, Dominic screamed. Get out here. Julian came out on the porch, wearing a silk robe, looking confused. Morgan was behind him, holding a coffee cup. What is wrong with you? Julian shouted. She's a rat. Dominic yelled, pointing at Morgan. I heard the tape. She's blaming us. She's telling the cops it was all your idea. Morgan looked stunned. What? Dominic, you're crazy. I haven't talked to anyone. Liar. Dominic charged up the steps. Julian stepped in between them, shoving Dominic back. Calm down. What tape? The tape Mason has. Dominic roared. She's on it. She's saying you threw him. She's setting us up to take the fall so she keeps the money. The other brothers, Grant, Kyle, Blake, were coming out of their houses now, drawn by the noise. They formed a circle. Julian looked at Morgan. His eyes were dark, suspicious. The seed of doubt I had planted was blooming instantly. They were criminals, and criminals never truly trust each other. Morgan, Julian said slowly. Is there something you want to tell me? Julian, he's lying. Morgan shrieked. Mason is doing this. He's manipulating you. I heard her voice. Dominic spat. She said Julian threw him. She said it. Julian turned on Morgan. He grabbed her arm, hard. Did you talk to him? Did you talk to Mason? No. You're hurting me. If you are selling me out, Julian whispered, his voice carrying across the lawn, I will bury you right next to that kid. The alliance was shattered. Dominic was against Morgan. Julian was suspicious of everyone. Ryder was missing. The financial pressure was crushing them. And now, they thought their sister was the snitch. I watched for a moment longer, then turned away. They were busy fighting each other. That meant they weren't watching the hospital. It was time to make my final move. I needed to secure Felix. Because when this house of cards finally collapsed, I needed to make sure my son wasn't caught in the debris. I drove to the hospital. But as I pulled into the lot, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A police cruiser was parked at the entrance. Chief Miller was standing there, talking to two uniformed officers. They were blocking the door. They weren't there to protect Felix. They were there to keep me out. Morgan must have called them before the fight started. She had played her last card. She had legally barred me from the building. I gripped the steering wheel. I couldn't walk in there. I would be arrested on sight. But I had friends. Friends who didn't wear badges, but who carried flags. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. Sergeant, I said when the voice answered. It's Ranger. I need a favor. A big one. Bring the boys. By the time the sun went down, the war was in full swing. The O'Connell Empire was crumbling from the inside, exactly how I wanted it. But a wildfire always spreads fastest when someone fans the flames, and tonight, I was going to turn that spark into an inferno. I met my old brothers in arms 3 miles outside town, in an abandoned maintenance shed tucked behind the highway. 3 men stood waiting when I arrived. Hunter, Preston, and Logan. We hadn't seen each other in years, but old soldiers don't need small talk. One look, one nod, and everyone knew why we were there. No explanations, no questions, just purpose. We gathered around the hood of my truck, maps and photos spread across it. I explained what I'd uncovered: the bridge, the brothers, Morgan's betrayal, and the audio recordings that could burn them all. They listened in silence. When I finished, Logan was the first to speak. "You want them alive or erased?" "Alive," I said, "but ruined. Every last one of them. And no trace that we were ever here. Simple. Clean. Ranger justice." That night, we split tasks. Hunter would go through their security feeds, shut off the compound's Wi-Fi, jam the phone lines, and loop their cameras. Logan would plant the vehicles I'd prepared at specific points along the estate. Parked cars with recording equipment inside, ready to capture everything that was about to happen. Preston was the silent insurance policy, stationed near the hospital, watching Felix from a distance. No one would touch my son again. All I had to do was make one last move. I drove alone to the edge of Julian's private office building, the headquarters of O'Connell Construction. Across the street, the lights in the windows flickered like a warning. The citywide scandal had hit that morning. News networks were replaying footage of state officials raiding their sites. The family's business accounts were frozen. Their investors were gone. The empire was starving. And now it was time to suffocate them. Inside the truck, I pulled up the file I had edited, the one that made it sound like Morgan was blaming her brothers. I uploaded it to 6 encrypted messaging apps simultaneously and labeled it from confidential source, internal family audio. Then I hit send. All 6 brothers. It didn't take long. 10 minutes later, the lights in the O'Connell compound blazed to life. I could see them through the scope. Morgan was shouting in the driveway. Julian was reeling, red-faced, veins popping in his neck. Grant was trying to de-escalate. Kyle and Blake were yelling over each other. Dominic stood off to the side with his arms crossed, watching it all explode. The tape worked. The poison was spreading exactly as planned. Then Hunter's voice came through my earpiece. "You seeing this? She's trying to leave." Morgan was running toward her car. Julian grabbed her by the wrist, screaming in her face. Blake joined in, slamming his fist on the hood of her SUV. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not guilt, not arrogance, actual fear. It was the look she'd forced onto my son that night at the bridge. I didn't look away. Julian was shouting something about selling them out, demanding her phone, swearing she'd cooperated with the state investigators. Morgan screamed back that it was him, that he was the one who killed Felix. It turned into chaos. Dominic tried pulling Julian off her. Blake swung at him by mistake. And suddenly, the brothers were brawling in their own driveway. I checked my recorder feed. Every word was being picked up perfectly. Every threat, every admission, every confession. Tonight, they were going to destroy themselves, and I would give the world front-row seats. Through the madness, Morgan managed to slip away. She jumped into her SUV, tires screaming as she sped off into the night. For a second, I thought she was gone. But Preston's voice came over comms next. "She's headed toward the hospital." Of course, Morgan wasn't going to flee. She was going to make her last stand where she thought she still had control, by Felix's bedside. "Stay on her," I ordered. "Don't intervene unless she tries to touch him." I refocused on the compound. It looked like a storm had hit it. Julian stumbled out onto the lawn with a bottle of whiskey in one hand, raging, shouting into the night about loyalty and betrayal. The others had retreated inside. He looked like a man with nothing left to lose, and that made him dangerous. I raised the binoculars again and zoomed in. He staggered, yelling slurred curses toward the road. He was looking for me now. Even if he couldn't see my face, I was living rent-free in his mind. "You wanted a war," I muttered. "Now you've got it." My phone buzzed. Hunter again. "They've lost power." I cut the main line. "Recorders are still rolling. Do you want me to take their backup servers offline too?" "Do it," I said. "They don't come back from this." The screen flickered with the progress bar. One by one, the O'Connell's business systems, communication lines, and external security feeds went dark. The empire Julian had built, his pride and shield, was now a digital wasteland. At exactly 1:14 a.m., my phone chimed again. New message, unknown number. "Mason, please." It's Morgan. I opened it. You win. You have the proof. Just stop this. They'll kill me. I'll confess. I'll tell the world. But please, don't hurt them. Don't hurt me. I stared at the message. For a brief second, the soldier inside me, the man who once loved her, hesitated. Then I saw Felix's face flash through my mind. His laugh. His tiny hand clutching mine. The terror in his eyes when she ordered him to be taught respect. I typed one line in reply. It's too late, Morgan. They're already doing that for me. Then I pressed send and drove toward the hospital. By the time I got there, the building was half dark, night shift nurses moving through quiet hallways. Preston was waiting in the parking lot. She's inside, he said. Room 214. Cops are distracted. Her old badge still works. I nodded and walked inside. The soldier in me was gone. The father had taken over. Down the silent corridor, I stopped outside Felix's room. Through the narrow window, I saw her. Morgan sat beside his bed, touching his hand, whispering something I couldn't hear. Her mascara was smeared, her face pale and swollen. Then she said something that froze me. Low, trembling, desperate. I didn't mean for it to go that far. She looked up and saw me in the window. Our eyes met for the first time since the bridge. Her face twisted, confusion and shame mixed together. She stood, walking toward the door, mouthing something like, please. I didn't move. I just looked at my son. The monitor was steady. He was still breathing. That was enough for now. Behind me, out in the parking lot, the night was breaking open, sirens, headlights, shouting. The O'Connell compound was burning from within. The world was waking up to its monsters. And for the first time in months, I almost smiled. The city was silent that night except for the sirens echoing in the distance and the faint hum of rain on the hospital windows. I stood there, watching Morgan through the glass until I heard the sound of multiple engines outside. 3 black trucks, identical, tinted windows, headlights off. The O'Connell brothers were coming. Preston's voice came through my earpiece, calm but urgent. Mason, movement on your 6. They're here. They followed her, I said quietly. Same plan. Same plan, he replied. Eyes on the objective. I turned my attention back to Felix's door. Morgan hadn't noticed anything yet. She was still beside our son's bed, her hand hovering inches from his small fingers. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and for a brief moment, I didn't see my enemy. I saw the woman I once trusted, the woman I used to believe still had a heart. That illusion was gone the second I saw Julian and his brothers step through the hospital's front doors. They weren't subtle this time. 6 large men in rain-soaked jackets, their boots echoing down the hallway. Julian walked in front, jaw clenched, eyes dead, the kind of look I'd seen on captured insurgents who'd lost everything and had only violence left to give. Logan's voice whispered in my earpiece, targets confirmed. Positions locked. 2 exits covered. You call it. Wait, I said. Let them walk in first. The O'Connells reached the ICU doors. The nurse at the counter stood, startled, but Julian showed something. Maybe a badge, maybe just money, and the nurse froze. The brothers moved down the hall toward room 214, every step deliberate. Morgan turned at the sound. Her eyes widened. Julian, she whispered. What are you doing here? He smiled without warmth. You shouldn't have sent the file, sis. Julian, I didn't. Save it, he barked. You played us. You set us up. And now we're cleaning up. I stepped out of the shadows before he could touch her. My voice cut through the hallway like a steel wire. You really want to finish what you started, Julian? Go ahead. This time I'm awake. Every brother spun toward me. Julian's face twisted in disgust. I knew it. He stepped forward. The grieving soldier finally crawled out of his cave. Walk away, I said. My tone was calm, level, the same one I'd used defusing bombs overseas. You know where this ends. He laughed hoarsely. You think I'm scared of some washed-up ranger? He pointed toward Felix's room. You think saving him will fix what you lost? Behind him, Dominic hesitated, glancing at me, then back at his brothers. There was guilt in his eyes. He'd heard the recordings too. He knew I wasn't lying. But it was too late for logic now. Julian was in freefall. You destroyed my business, my family's name, everything, Julian growled. You want a war? You've got one. He reached into his jacket. Hunter's voice hissed in my ear. He's pulling a weapon. Confirm engagement. Confirmed, I said quietly. The next moment exploded in chaos. The fire alarm blared. Hunter's doing. Sprinklers burst from the ceiling, flooding the hallway in a glittering downpour. Red lights spun across the walls, painting everything in a nightmare hue. The brothers scattered, shouting, slipping in the water. Security was moving toward the noise, but we had seconds before they reached us. I advanced. I grabbed Julian's arm before he could draw fully. The gun clattered to the floor. We hit the wall hard. He threw a punch. I absorbed it and drove my elbow into his ribs, a precise, surgical strike. He gasped. The man was muscle, but no discipline. The others lunged toward me, but the sprinklers blinded them. Logan and Hunter stepped out from the side corridor, weapons drawn, but held low. Non-lethal, shock rounds only. They knew the drill. Panic them, break them, never leave a mark that couldn't be explained by their own reckless fight. The hallway turned into a storm of confusion. Shouts. Adrenaline. Fear. Dominic yelled over the chaos. Julian, stop. You'll kill him. Julian spat blood. I want to. I twisted his arm behind his back and slammed him into the floor. The gun slid down the hall and stopped at Morgan's feet. She stared at it like it was a venomous snake. Water poured from the ceiling. Julian coughed, his rage collapsing into exhaustion. What do you want, Mason? Just kill me already. I crouched down beside him. No, I said evenly. You don't get that kind of mercy. I leaned closer to his ear. You'll wake up tomorrow and every piece of your life, your money, your name, your empire, will be gone. And when you finally beg for an end, I'll make sure the world keeps you alive to face what you did. His eyes flickered, a flash of terror. Just 1 second of realizing he'd lost. Security guards arrived then, shouting commands. My men melted back into the smoke and alarms as planned. I stood slowly and raised my hands, pretending to cooperate. Before the guards reached us, I looked at Morgan. Tell them the truth, I said. Tell them who threw our son off that bridge. She nodded faintly, shaking. I will. But I didn't believe her. The guards grabbed Julian first. He had no weapon now, just bruises and rage. Blake and Grant were screaming about self-defense. They didn't see the small white USB I'd slipped into Julian's jacket pocket. A copy of every confession, every forged contract, every recorded threat. That drive was going to deliver the justice I couldn't. As the guards dragged them away, I caught one last look at Felix. He was still breathing, the steady rhythm of hope in a world gone rotten. I stepped outside into the rain. It was still coming down hard, washing the blood and sprinkler water from my face. Preston's voice came through my earpiece again. We have them on record, Mason. The confession's clean. Every angle. Good, I said quietly. Send it. Full drop. Press, feds, everyone. Already done. The storm outside grew heavier, but inside me, it was finally quiet. I watched the flashing red lights fade behind me as the ambulances and cop cars filled the lot. The O'Connells had tried to ambush a soldier. Tonight, all they managed was to hand me their own execution on a silver plate. And they hadn't realized. This was still only the beginning. Morning came with gray skies and a kind of silence that only follows chaos. The O'Connell name was already burning every news cycle in the state. Every channel ran the leaked recordings, Ryder's confession, the business fraud, and the video of Julian storming into the hospital like a man possessed. Their empire was gone, their assets frozen, their allies fleeing. But what really detonated the bomb was the audio Morgan had tried to erase, the one where she ordered my son to be scared. It hit the news mid-morning, leaked anonymously from an encrypted source. That source was me. I sat in my truck outside the county courthouse, watching as reporters swarmed the steps. Words like attempted murder, conspiracy, and child endangerment scrolled across news tickers. The story had gone national. Julian was still in county holding from last night's brawl, and within hours the charges would multiply. But this wasn't over. Not until I heard Julian confess with his own voice. The courts could slow this down. Lawyers could spin it. I needed truth, raw and undeniable, straight from the man who dropped my son. At 9 a.m., a black sedan pulled to the curb. Two of Julian's lawyers got out, suits sharp, faces grim. They saw me and froze. They knew who I was. But they said nothing, just kept walking. Money could buy a lot, but not redemption. An hour later, I walked into the courthouse lobby. Logan was inside already, posing as courthouse maintenance with an ID badge that even fooled the deputies. Preston was parked across the street, monitoring the jailhouse feed through a loop Hunter had rigged the night before. Nothing unusual for him, just shadows running operations like the old days. Julian was being brought in for arraignment. I watched through the glass partition as they led him to a holding room, chain cuffs clinking at his wrists. The arrogance was gone. He looked older, smaller, like a man deflated from the inside. For the first time, his silence wasn't control, it was defeat. I told the deputy at the door I needed 10 minutes alone. My military credentials still carried federal clearance. It got me through without questions. The door buzzed. Julian looked up when I stepped inside. "You," he muttered, voice gravelly. I pulled out the chair across from him. "Sit down," I said. "I've got nothing to say to you. You've got everything to say to me. And before this day's over, you'll say it." He scoffed, but he didn't look me in the eye. "You think leaking those files gets your kid back on his feet? You think that makes you the hero?" I leaned forward, quiet but precise. "I don't need to be the hero. I just need the truth on record. Your voice, saying what happened." Julian looked up slowly, anger flickering faintly. "The truth? The truth is, it wasn't supposed to go that way. We were supposed to shake him up, make him afraid to run back to you." Morgan said the boy was turning on her. "The more I think about it, the less I care whose idea it was. I did it. You happy now?" Every breath felt heavier, but I didn't move. My recorder rested on the table, glowing red. "She told me to scare him," Julian continued, voice shaking between rage and resignation. "Said a lesson would fix him. I didn't mean to let go. Damn it. It just slipped." The kid was screaming. I panicked. I thought the water was shallow. He stared down at his hands, rubbing his thumbs together. Then he stopped screaming. The words hung there. For a second, even he seemed to realize what he'd said. "You murdered a child, Julian," I whispered. Not scared him. "You murdered him." His eyes lifted, and for the first time in his life, Julian O'Connell looked afraid. "It was an accident." "No," I said quietly. "What came after was the accident. You surviving this long." Before he could respond, the cell intercom buzzed. The deputy's voice crackled. "O'Connell, time's up. They're moving you upstairs." I stood, pocketing the recorder. "You just told the world," I said. "And you don't even know it." "What the hell does that mean?" "It means the mic in front of you isn't muted." His head snapped toward it. The tiny red diode on the intercom flickered. Hunter had patched the audio through the courthouse's surveillance system 10 minutes ago. The entire confession had streamed directly into the evidence server and the cloud backup of 3 separate news outlets. While Julian screamed, the door opened. Deputies rushed in, shouting, "Get back!" He lunged, but I was already out the door. By the time I hit the street, Preston's voice came through the radio. "It's live, boss. Recorder feed confirmed by local media. It's over." But the knot in my chest wouldn't loosen. Julian's words rang over and over between my ears. Morgan said the boy was turning on her. Morgan. I drove straight to the family estate. The gates were still open from the police seizure, the once manicured lawns littered with debris, newspapers, and broken pride. I parked near the porch and stepped out into the silence. Inside, the house looked like an abandoned museum. Overturned chairs, shattered glass, photo frames lying face down. In the center of the living room, on the grand piano, sat an envelope with my name scrawled across it. I tore it open with shaking hands. "If you're reading this, it means they're gone." It means you won. But don't think you're better than us, Mason. You made war on family, on blood. You could have walked away. You didn't. Maybe you got what you wanted, but you lost the only thing that mattered, peace. Signed only, Morgan. Beside it was her wedding ring. And for the first time since Felix's fall, I didn't feel anger. Only an emptiness that no victory could fill. I took the ring, slipped it into my pocket, and walked outside into the filtered sunlight. Somewhere in that same moment, at the hospital uptown, my son's fingers twitched. A nurse saw it and gasped. Machines beeped faster, quieter, steadier. Felix was waking up. I looked toward the horizon as my phone buzzed again. Logan's voice broke through, almost smiling. You did it, man. They've got sworn confessions, arrests, everything. The O'Connells are finished. No, I said softly. Not finished. Just beginning. Because now there was one thing left, Morgan's reckoning. The next day dawned beneath a heavy sky. The storm that had hung over Oakwood for weeks finally broke into sunlight, but the headlines were darker than ever. O'Connell dynasty implodes. The papers screamed. Every channel looped Julian's confession, Ryder's recording, and Morgan's phone audio on repeat, as if the whole state couldn't look away from its favorite tragedy. For years, they walked through this town untouchable. Money, influence, power. Now, the same doors that once opened for them were bolted shut. Their lawyers abandoned them. Their investors fled. Their lawyers' refused their calls. But I wasn't looking for the world's justice. I wanted something quieter, more permanent. At 10 a.m., I sat in the courthouse parking lot while a storm of reporters battled for camera angles near the entrance. Today was sentencing. The O'Connell brothers were being arraigned separately, one by one, for charges ranging from fraud to conspiracy to attempted murder. It was the kind of circus where no one laughed. Morgan's hearing was last. I waited until noon before stepping inside. The courtroom air was cold. Reporters filled the gallery, their pens scratching like flies buzzing around the carcass of a fallen empire. In the front row sat the remnants of the family. Julian pale and bruised behind the glass partition, Dominic stone-faced, Ryder trembling. Morgan sat alone, wrapped in gray like a ghost of herself. When she looked up and saw me enter the back row, her breath caught. She looked ready to cry, or maybe scream. The judge entered. The clerk read the charges. Every word hit the room like a nail into a coffin. Conspiracy to commit endangerment of a minor. Malicious negligence resulting in bodily harm. Tampering with police evidence. Morgan's lawyer whispered in her ear, but she barely nodded. The prosecutor called witnesses, the doctors, the police chief, even the hospital guards from the ambush that night. All of them painted a picture of arrogance and intent. The story was clear now. Morgan had ordered the intimidation. The brothers had executed it. And I had survived long enough to prove it. Then came the moment the court called me to the stand. I hadn't planned on speaking. But when I walked up, and the entire courtroom turned its gaze on me, I realized silence would be a lie. The prosecutor asked me to recount that night. The bridge, the hospital, the bruise on Felix's arm. I told it plain. No drama. No revenge in my tone. Just the truth. When I paused, the prosecutor hesitated, then asked quietly, "Do you forgive her?" My throat tightened. I looked at Morgan. She was crying. Not faking. Not performing. Just quietly broken. Maybe for what she lost, or what she became, or for realizing too late who she had destroyed. I took a breath and said, "No, but I forgive myself for ever thinking she couldn't do it." The judge called for silence. It took another hour for the gavel to fall. The sentences came swift and precise. The brothers were handed years of prison time, each name weighed down by greed and guilt. And then came Morgan's turn. The courtroom was silent when the judge spoke her fate. "Given your direct involvement in arranging the events leading to the near death of your child, and given the overwhelming public evidence of your coercion and deceit, this court sentences you to 12 years state imprisonment, with parole eligibility after 8. Morgan's head dropped. Her lawyer touched her shoulder, but she brushed his hand away. I rose and left before they escorted her out. Outside, the courthouse steps were buried under reporters, microphones, flashing lights. They shouted my name. Mason, do you have any comment? Mason, will you speak to the press? Mason, what does justice mean to you now? But I didn't stop. Justice wasn't loud or shiny. It was quiet. It was the look on my son's face when he finally opened his eyes again. And 2 days later, he did. I was sitting outside his hospital room when the nurse came running, shouting for the doctor. My heart stopped. I pushed through the doors, and there he was. Felix. Awake. Dazed, weak, but breathing on his own. His eyes flickered, trying to adjust to the light. When he saw me, his lips trembled into the faintest smile. Dad, it broke me. I grabbed his hand and pressed it against my chest, barely able to speak. Yeah, buddy. I'm here. You're safe now. The months that followed were slow and quiet. Therapy. Recovery. Felix's voice weak at first, but one day, he laughed again. That sound erased every night of rage I'd carried. Morgan wrote letters from prison. I didn't open them. Some battles don't need to be revisited. As the seasons changed, the O'Connell estate was seized by the state. The bridge where it all began was repaired, repainted, renamed the Felix Crossing, after a local movement raised funds to install new safety rails. People called it a symbol of resilience. For me, it was just a place where I threw away the last of my hate. On a winter morning 1 year later, I stood at that same spot with Felix beside me. He was taller now, strong again, eyes alive. He looked at the water and then back at me. Are they gone, Dad? He asked. Yeah, I said softly. They're gone. He nodded once, staring into the rippling current. Good. The quiet of that moment felt like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. I placed my hand on his shoulder. This isn't about revenge anymore, Felix, I said. It's about starting over. Building something worth protecting. He smiled. Like soldiers do. I smiled back. Exactly like soldiers do. And as we walked back toward the truck, the sunlight broke through the clouds, shining down on the bridge. The same place they tried to destroy us, now carrying us home. It was over. Finally, completely over. A full year passed. Oakwood rebuilt itself, the way small towns do, slowly, quietly, pretending nothing ever happened while the ghosts still whispered under the surface. But for me, ghosts were nothing new. I'd learned to live with them, even talk to them sometimes when the nights got too long. Felix was home now. He still walked with a slight limp, though his spirit had healed faster than his bones. His doctors called it miraculous. I called it a second chance. Most mornings, we'd sit on the porch together, just the two of us, watching the sunrise burn the fog off the hills. He liked to ask me about the army, about missions and faraway places. I told him pieces of the truth, the parts about resilience, purpose, loyalty, not the parts about loss, betrayal, or what men do when they're broken. One afternoon, he came to me holding a drawing. It was a soldier standing beside a boy on a bridge. Above it, he'd written in uneven handwriting, "Heroes don't need medals. They just need to come home." I looked at it for a long time before speaking. That's beautiful, buddy. He smiled. It's us, right? I nodded. Yeah, it's us. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel like surrender. It felt like survival. Justice had come and gone, but healing was something earned every day after. Still, some nights, when the wind rustled through the window and the old bridge's metal cables sang faintly in the distance, I'd remember the cold water, the lies, the faces I'd destroyed to make things right. People always called it revenge, but to me, it was something simpler. It was a promise kept. Felix once asked me if I missed her, his mother. That was the only time I didn't know what to say. I miss who she used to be, I finally told him. And I hope someday, wherever she is, she remembers who she promised to be. The horizon was warm that evening, the sky painted in deep oranges and golds. Felix squeezed my hand and said softly, "We're safe now, right?" "Yeah," I said. "We're safe. We stood together in silence as the last light faded behind the bridge that carried both our pain and redemption. And for the first time, the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Because the nightmare had ended, and a new mission had begun, to live, to rebuild, to never become what broke us. Then, I turned to you, the listener, the believer in stories like this one. And I want to ask you something. What would you do if the people you trusted most turned into your greatest betrayal? Think about it. Because some wars are fought with weapons, and some are fought with truth. If this story gripped you, moved you, or made you feel something deep, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel, how they connect us across oceans and cities. And if you want more stories of heartbreak, betrayal, and quiet revenge that test the soul, subscribe, hit like, and stay tuned. I promise every new story will be even more thrilling, more emotional, and more unforgettable. Until the next tale, take care of yourself. And remember, the strongest soldiers aren't always on battlefields. Sometimes, they're just out here, quietly surviving. See you in the next epic revenge story.